Hello, hello. Good morning. Welcome everybody, and to those watching on live stream. Cold, isn't it? Just very quickly, as you know, we are endeavouring to start up some new interest groups, and you put your names on those boards. In summary of that, the Thursday film group had 11 people, the Court Theatre 19 people, the book discussion group 8, the music appreciation 7, the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra 7, the Bridge 7, and Craft 4. So a total of 63 people wanting to join new interest groups. On myself, add 164. The committee is very keen to get these going. Realistically, if we get them going in the new year, we'll be doing pretty well. It won't happen, or be very difficult to happen, unless we have conveners, someone who's prepared to sort of gather it together, make the rules, do the organising for each one. It sounds big, it's not, but if anyone would care, who put their names down on those lists, would care to see me, or email me, or make contact, so that they're pleased to be a convener, I'd love to hear from them. The choir did not sing this morning, but they'll be back in the chapel next week. So the choir's still going, didn't today. Okay, I'll ask Joan to introduce our speaker for this morning. Thank you, Joan.
Don't blame me for that. Right, good morning everybody. I'm introducing our speaker today, Gabriel Huia. As chair of Maori and Pacific mental health provider Emerge Aotearoa, Gabriel Huia has led the organisation to become an NGO leader. She managed the communication strategy for Ngāi Tahu during its negotiation and post-settlement periods. She instigated and was editor of the tribal magazine Te Karaka. She has held several director positions and is chair of Tahu Communications and the Whānau Ora Te Pounamu Regional Leadership Team. Following the 2011 Christchurch earthquake, she established the Mana Waitaha Charitable Trust, which developed the infrastructure and land zone reform at Tuahiwi, so tribal members could live on their traditional land. Gabriel is acting chair of her local marae at Tuahiwi and current chief executive of Te Kura Takapini Limited, the Ngāi Tahu entity with responsibility for freshwater management with the Ngāi Tahu Takiwā. Gabriel is a member of the working group on representation, governance and accountability of new water services entities. She has extensive governance expertise and is an RMA commissioner following completion of the Making Good Decisions training. She strives to leave a positive legacy for future generations through her work and is committed to improving water quality and providing positive and equitable health outcomes for Māori. Let me introduce Gabriel to you.
Tēnā rā koutou katoa, nā mihi nui ki a koutou, kia ora mō tō manaaki ki a mātou, nā mihi nui ki tēnei whare ko te whare o Ihu Karaiti. I just said thank you very much for having me here today, and I mihied to this beautiful house of Christ. So thank you very much, Joan, for the introduction. A lot of it is in the past, and right now I have been concentrating only on the last part of that bio, which is working for Ngāi Tahu, running the company that has been set up to look at fresh water in the South Island. So basically, some background to me. On my father's side, I'm Ngāi Tahu, and my mother's side, she's Pākehā. She was Pākehā, they're both deceased now, and she was born in Littleton. My father's family comes from Tuahiwi, which is in North Canterbury, and I live there today on an original 14-acre block where we were put on reservation to live in 1848. And each family were given a 14-acre block, and my husband and I still live on one of our original family block. So it's just on the wood end side of Tuahiwi, and it's a very precious place for us because we've got subdivisions happening all around us, but in our lifetime, we will do our best to preserve our 14 acres because of the history that's contained there. My family, the Huria family in Tuahiwi, is renowned for being a family that fishes, hunts, and gathers food. And in particular, on my side of the family, fishing has been our thing. So when I'm not working at Ngāi Tahu, my husband and I are out trout fishing anywhere around North Canterbury that we can go, or white baiting, or eeling, or mutton birding. So that's what we do, and that's our recreation. And part of my family and my husband's family, he's from the Tau family at Tuahiwi. And part of our thing is that we gather food, we keep our traditional practices alive, we do the same practices that we have been doing for the last 200 or 300 years in how we process our food, and we teach it to the next generations so they can also be mahinga kai people. The Ngāi Tahu term for it is mahika kai, but we say mahinga kai, so it's just the K and the NG. So in my lifetime, in the last 30 years actually, we have witnessed the degradation of the waterways around us in North Canterbury. So I'm here today with my colleague Tom, who works with me at Ngāi Tahu, and Tom's a historian by trade, and he's just working with us but also doing his PhD at Canterbury University in the history department and in the history of Ngāi Tahu's issues with fresh water. And Tom's, fine for me to tell you his age, he's 27, and in his lifetime he has never swum in a Canterbury river. Now for everybody that comes from Canterbury and was born and bred in Canterbury like I was, swimming in Canterbury rivers were a part of how we lived. It was summer, it was coast forward if you were very little, and then you progressed to the bigger rivers. If you're from Tuahiwi, you never swim in the Waimakariri, and it's pretty obvious that the hidden currents and eddies take a lot of lives. So you'll never find a Tuahiwi person swimming in that river. But in the Ashley and all of the other rivers around North Canterbury, we would spend our summers swimming in them. And as Joan said in my bio, I was part of the team that settled the Ngāi Tahu claim. And as I distinctly remember it, some of the toughest negotiations were going on during the whitebait season of 1996. And the way that I was able to manage my way through that personally was to go whitebaiting. And I remember sitting on the edge of the Ashley River, and it was a very beautiful Labour weekend, extremely hot, and I picked up a handful of the water and drank it, because you could back then. Now, if I did that, I'd get seriously sick. If my dog did it, not that I've got a dog, but if I had one, it would die. So what I want to talk to you about is, from our perspective, Canterbury isn't alone in the South Island with this. Otago's heading this way, and the only reason why the West Coast and the Southland aren't as bad is because it's very pluvial. So Canterbury was meant to be the granary of the nation. It wasn't meant to be the dairy farm of the nation. even though in saying that, Ngāi Tahu has 17 dairy farms in Airwell, there's a lot of issues that we are dealing with as a tribe, and I'll talk a bit more about that. But one of the biggest issue we've identified is that business as usual when it comes to fresh water isn't working. And we're not against business and we're not against industry, but we think collectively as the South Island, we have to change things and do things differently. Because I want to see my grandchildren and children be able to swim in our Canterbury rivers. And other countries like Switzerland have been in this position and they have turned things around. So we do think it's possible, we just have to think differently about water. So did you ever think in your lifetime that you would see these sorts of signs? Did you? Did you think that this was possible? Treated industrial liquid waste present in the water in this area, the water may not meet the water standard for swimming. Did you think that this would be something that would be common? I certainly didn't, and I'm not that much younger than you, but I'm a bit younger. Industrial waste and nitrates in the waterways have contributed this. And another study that we are helping with is the Otago University nitrates study. And there's some very, very clever people at med school in Wellington, and they are doing a massive study on the impact of nitrates in our drinking water on our health. And one of our tribal members in particular is looking at the impact of nitrates in pregnant women and the increase in incidence of blue babies. So we're still in that whole investigation process, but one of the things that this group have been doing, they've got a nitrate reader and they go out to different areas and people bring their samples of drinking water and they test them for nitrates to see whether they're within the WHO standards. One of their studies is looking at that actually the WHO standards are too high for health, for human health. And they recently had a half a day or a day out in Selwyn, and they were inundated with people bringing their water to test. And in some of the incidences, the levels of most of them were good, but there were probably about a quarter where the nitrate levels in some of those areas were way too high. And in particular, one woman that stood out was pregnant, and the testers advised her not to drink her home drinking water. So we're actually, in our thinking as a tribe, no one in this country should have to live with that. No one. And that leads to actually where our stand has come. So this is another picture taken out at Lake Forsyth, Ellesmere, on that whole Birdlings Flat strip. And if you see that, what is so incongruous about this picture is it's got toxic algae information for those who can't see it, and red is dangerous, and green on that measure is okay. So that's a sign for it. That's another, this is like we're living, I've used that picture because it looks like we're living in a surreal moonscape where you have a metre of toxic algae in the water, algae, sorry, I'm not saying it properly. And just below it is meet the, what is the word? Can you see that? Meet the locals. So it's all the bird life and the wonderful, extraordinary bird life and the nature that is in that part of the world. And that becomes a little subset of the measure for how toxic the water is. So those birds and that life is living in that environment. And for us to think that that's okay, I think we've lost it, really, because we don't think that is okay. That shouldn't be there, and we need to be doing something to stop that. The point I'm trying to make is Ngāi Tahu does not accept the current state of fresh water. We believe we have rights and interests, and they need to be recognised because we want to change what's happening to our part of the country. And that is not saying, and I keep repeating this, we do not think we own water. We do not want to own water. As a tribe, our mantra has been, we have rights and interests, which actually lead us to have a say that this isn't good enough. With rights and interests come obligations, and we see as a tribe that our obligation is to stand up and fight for fresh water when the rest of the world seems to be forgetting about it. This was another, that was Lake Forsyth on that particular day we took that picture. And when you look at how glorious that is, I'm a real Cantabrian. I love this part of the world. And we just came back 2 weeks ago from the States and Canada, and Canada's beautiful. The States is going to hell in a handbag. And we came back, and when you think about where we live, this is a drive away from here. You can have a cup of tea here and in an hour and a half be there. We are so incredibly lucky to live in this country and to live in this environment, and we need to preserve it and hold it and keep it precious, because it's a gift to us, and our job, all of our job, is to make sure that we can pass that gift onto the next generations intact, and currently we can't. So one of the big issues that we addressed earlier, a few months ago, actually, we've been from the local marae where I come from out at Tuahiwi. Tuahuriri is the name of the hapu, and that's my hapu. And one of the things we did was, in having an effective say in this current environment, was to join up with AWA, who were the NGO, trying to stop Cloud Ocean and the water bottling and the resource consent granted by ECAN. So we came in as an interested party. And actually our runanga, so our marae and runanga, Ngāi Tahu is a big organisation. There's 18 villages that make up the Ngāi Tahu organisation around the whole tribal area. They're not wealthy, okay? They're small little villages like Tuahiwi, where we spend all of our money that we get about 500,000 a year, which is like our tax back to the organisation for allowing it to be. And we spend it on looking after our people, for our elders if they need grants for glasses, for people that come unstuck in their lives and need a hand up, we help with that. We feed people, and we help with housing, and we try and help people in different social aspects of their life. So we spend 500,000 on that. We've got 42,000 members in Tuahiwi alone, so they all descend back to our marae at Tuahiwi, which is we're a big hapu sub-tribe of Ngāi Tahu. We spent 100,000 this last year on being interveners in this court case. So that's another thing that we're thinking about. Justice is only accessible if you have money. It's not accessible if we didn't have that 100,000 to spend on the lawyers to help fight this case. So basically, for those who don't know about the case, 2 water bottling companies, Cloud Ocean and Rapaki Natural Resources, had consents to extract 8.8 billion litres of water from the Christchurch aquifers each year. Now that is the same amount of water taken out of Riccarton, the whole of Riccarton, and that's a very populated part of the city. It's roughly about the same amount. And they were putting it into plastic bottles like that and exporting it overseas. We felt that was wrong, because so what they'd done, Environment Canterbury had decided to convert a water resource consent from the former meat processing plant and wool scouring site into consents for bottled water. Now, a lot of our men out at Tuahiwi had worked on those in the meat processing plant and in the wool scour, and they knew what those aquifers were about. And what the ECAN, and ECAN really had to do it because of the way the nation's regulations and laws were. So they aren't really the baddie in this. But we ended up joining up with AWA to take them to court to try and ban the water bottling. Now, the Court of Appeal was maybe 2 months ago. The decision came out maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and they actually decided in our favour. So those, yes, we were very happy that day. So 8.8 billion litres of water remains in Papatūānuku, and it's not being put into those plastic bottles to be exported. So yes, it was a really... And that was actually Awa as well, were the main, and we were the interveners, so we played a small part. And in the end, the Court of Appeal decided not to even address our cultural arguments because they had said no to the original consent. So for us, it was fantastic. It was a win. But what it highlighted to us is that water consents in New Zealand are like the Wild West, where you get on your horse, you go and put your stake in the ground, you pay $1 million to get the consent, and then you've got it. Nobody measures how much does that waterway have to give? How much does it need to hold for the actual waterway itself to exist? How much does it need to give for us to all drink it? And then how much is left over for everything else that we want to do with it? And we have never had a practice in this country of looking at water like that. And we think we need to start looking at water like that. We've got some very extremely clever people in our universities and researching water, and we think that the time's come for us to start thinking differently about the way we do resource consenting. Currently it's first in, first serve, and when it's an extractive process like that, the waterway always comes last. And a lot of the Canterbury rivers are over-allocated currently. And so and there's a lot of wastage where you can buy a little 7-acre block out at Selwyn and it's got a water consent in it, but you're just putting your nice house on it and a couple of ponies for the kids, and you're never going to use that consent. So there's a lot of wastage in the system that needs to just be tightened up if we looked at water as a precious resource. What's next? Yeah. Hang on, I'll just get to my spot. Ihutai was a traditional food gathering place for us. So where the whole sewage treatment plant is and that whole estuary was a very important place for us on our journeys up and down the coastline of the South Island. And Ihutai was an important eel weir. In 1868, the Native Land Court granted us a fishing easement there. In 1956, it was confiscated by the Public Works Act without compensation to us. In 1998, this land was returned as part of the Ngāi Tahu Deed of Settlement. However, it was never paid for. And the sewage system of Christchurch was on it. So what we were going to do, say, take it off, we don't want it there anymore. Recently it's burned down. But what state is our infrastructure in for this sort of thing to happen? So one of the things we think, and this is just the natural progression of politics, that when you are running for election, like this Saturday with the councillors, you think about schools and swimming pools and beautiful libraries, which we do have very beautiful facilities in Christchurch now. You don't necessarily, who's going to vote me in if I campaign on what's under the roads and what's in the three waters? It doesn't get traction, and it's just the nature of things. I would much rather look at and go and visit Tūranga, the library, because it is beautiful and we're really lucky to have it, than I would to think about the connection points from Avonhead out to there, which you will hear more about from Helen Beaumont next week. But it just isn't something that captures your attention. When you're at home and you flush the loo or you turn on the tap, you don't think about where that journey is going and where it's going to end up really. When you're washing your car and you're thinking about the water running down your driveway into the stormwater drains, do you think about we sort of do. Some people do, yeah, but most people probably don't. I mean, it's only since when I worked at council that I started to be aware of all of this and actually be careful what you wash your car with, because it runs into the stormwater drains and goes into the local waterways. But previous to that, I would have had no idea, and I thought I was a good citizen of this town. You know? So one of the things we're saying is, we support the Three Waters reform. Now, that may be controversial in this audience because a lot of people don't, and we absolutely recognise people's opinion to not agree with us. So we absolutely respect that. But what we want to do is shift away the water services from 67 separate councils who all have their different way of doing things. And I know a lot of people are worried about a giant corporate running things and becoming a monopoly, but we think that everybody in our takiwa has a right to decent Three Waters. That's a right to clean drinking water, and it's a right to good stormwater in your community, and it's a right to really good sewage treatment in your community. And we don't just think it's the prerogative of the ratepayers of Christchurch, who have more money to do better things, versus, say, the people in Morven who recently had nitrate levels in their drinking water above the WHO standards that they think went back to a bread making factory that they had there. We believe that they have, that they have every right, just as much right as we do, to decent Three Waters. So as a tribe, we've got our 18 villages, and you know in Dunedin, in Puketeraki a few years ago, we had the lead scare in the drinking water. Well, that proved to be a one-off incident. It wasn't but though we lived alongside those communities where, imagine yourself if you find out you have a potential that you've had lead poisoning and you've been drinking this water your whole life, because our communities do tend to stay there their whole life, and suddenly your life might be shortened because of lead poisoning. I mean, we walked with those communities through that, and it was a very terrifying prospect. And in our view, no one in this country should go through that, because we should be doing better at setting the Three Waters up. We're all taxpayers, and we should be doing better at it. So that's the basis of why we think Three Waters needs to happen. If you think about it, back in the day where every little council had its own railway line, and that's why New Zealand has the steam train lines to nowhere, because the little local community would build a railway line and it didn't connect up with anything. Well, we see the water network, the Three Waters network, is the same. We need to have a spread across the takiwa that takes into account every community. And we will be advocating for that. So who knows where this will all end up? But we'll say the same that we've always said from day one around Three Waters. We believe in every member of our takiwa, that's Ngāi Tahu and non-Ngāi Tahu alike, and their access to decent Three Waters. And that's what we'll always promote. There's a lot of disinformation being peddled about us and the reforms out there, and I just want to dispel some of the myths while I've got a captured audience and the opportunity to. So one of the myths is that the government is handing ownership of water assets to iwi Māori. This is not true. Under the reforms, iwi Māori will not own or manage the assets. The bill provides for collective public ownership through shares assigned to each council within the entity service area. We strongly support water assets paid for by the public and communities remaining in public ownership. And we see ourselves as one of the last bastions that will fight for that in the Ngāi Tahu takiwa in the South Island. Ngāi Tahu does not support privatisation. Iwi representation on Three Waters governance and our treaty partnership with the Crown is an ironclad protection against future privatisation. Second myth is the reforms are a backdoor for iwi Māori ownership of water. Also untrue. While it's true that there are unresolved issues around our interests in freshwater. These are not connected to the Three Waters reform, and as I said earlier, Ngāi Tahu have never wanted ownership of water. We want to take part in the regulation of freshwater. We don't want ownership, and I can't stress that enough. Myth number 3, iwi Māori will have undue influence and control over water services. Again, untrue. While under the proposed reform, the regional representative groups that sit at the top are 6 Ngāi Tahu for our takiwa and 6 council representatives. They have an influence over the strategic direction of the water services entity, but the direct control of that entity will sit with the board, which we would expect will be personed with very experienced board representatives, and we want to be able to hold them to account because we want those outcomes where there's a better service provided for everybody that lives across our takiwa. We're already working as Runanga very constructively with councils, and we've had since settlement 30 years ago, we started on a whole new era of working with councils, and I think across the whole Ngāi Tahu takiwa, we've got some very good relationships with councils. So we think that we are in a position to actually do some very good constructive things with councils for the communities of the South Island. Here's another reason, I've got my pictures round the wrong way, so I should have talked about this earlier, is another reason why we're so hot on fresh water is if you take Lake Ellesmere. So I spent my life eeling on Lake Ellesmere, and when our sons who are now 22 and 23 were little, I went out with their grandmother regularly during the floundering and eeling across Lake Ellesmere. And it was hilarious. The boys were little 2 and 3-year-olds, and their grandfather he was Rakihi Tau, or Rick Tau, that a lot of people may know in the room, and he was such a hard case. He'd tie a rope around his waist, put them in the dinghy, and then we'd walk out into right across Lake Ellesmere with the flounder net, and the cars would become little wee dots on the horizon. We were walking so far out, and the kids would be, rocking the boat because they were kids. And he was quite a smoker, and I was always worried what would happen if anything happened to him in the middle of the lake, and how would I get him and the dinghy back, how many even miles we were across the lake. So it used to be funny, but I was always a bit worried. But what we were doing is getting eels and flounders across the lake, and we would distribute them around the kaumata of Christchurch on our way back. So if you knew, Ricky was a very gregarious person, and the trip out there was about an hour and 15 minutes. The trip home was about 4 hours, with stopping to drop off the flounders and cups of tea all along the way with the various kaumata in Christchurch, and the kids getting more and more tired and wound up. But the point was we could do that, and it was a wonderful practice of how we went food gathering and distributed it to different families throughout the city. And that was also the people at Ngāhoe Whā, the Mātāwaka Māoris who go to Ngāhoe Whā over in Aranui, and we would also feed their kaumata. Now you can't do that. Now the lake's too polluted, and it's like the dirty big drain of Canterbury, and everything, including all the council stormwater drains, empty into it. And we call it, in economic terms, it's an externality sink, where in our settlement, the bed of that lake came back to Ngāi Tahu, so we own the bed. But on top of it, it's absolutely filthy. You wouldn't walk out in it now. You wouldn't, without probably a hazmat suit on or something. But what we're saying is, who pays for the pollution of that lake? Is it you and I? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be us, because we aren't the polluters. But Ngāi Tahu is the externality sink for everybody putting their rubbish into that lake. And this is another part of what our arguments are, is we've got to do it better. The whole country has to do it better. And we need to, as members of the public and as Ngāi Tahu, we need to set our expectations higher. That actually, I want my children to be able to flounder in that lake like I did. And I want to be able to feel safe eating it. So this brings me to our statement of claim. So in 2020, Ngāi Tahu tribal leaders filed a statement of claim in recognition of Ngāi Tahu rangatiratanga over fresh water in our takiwā. And basically, we did that for all the reasons I've been talking about. That we decided that we had to put our stake in the ground to try and halt what was happening in our environment. We've been doing a lot of legal ping pong with the Crown ever since, and we are progressing. So in actual fact, I have to say that in putting the statement of claim, it did make the Crown sit up and think a little bit. I'm not sure where the end result will be, but we just keep progressing it step by step. It's also been very good for the tribe, because what it's done is highlighted what our values are and what we as ordinary tribal members want to see. And as a result, Ngāi Tahu farming, which I talked about, the 17 farms up at Airwell, that I think 12 are dairy farms. So what they did, they have a resource consent that allows them to put another 7,000 cows on those farms. So if you think about, that was all pine tree forest, and the soil is very thin there. And what basically the runoff leaches right straight through the soil. It's a very thin layer. And what has happened with us educating ourselves and educating the tribal leadership around fresh water is that Ngāi Tahu farming is not doing that. So they're not maximising their resource consent, and they're not putting that many farms. And what they've recently done is embarked on a 8-year study where they have 2 farms side by side. One's a regenerative farm, and the other's the sort of factory dairy farming, bog standard dairy farming. And they're going to study it for 2 years and look at every outcome to see if regenerative farming can get the same outcomes as standard farming or better. And if that's the case, we're converting all of them to that regenerative farming. So far, it's looking really positive. And the farmers themselves are saying that they feel much better farming this way because their feet walk in long grass. And they say it's so unusual for them to feel the coolness of long grass and the dew in the early morning on their feet than it is from them factory farming. So when you think about that, you wonder, what the hell have we done where a farmer's not walking through long grass on a dairy farm? And so we're very keen. So what it's done amongst ourselves is actually highlighted where we have to change. We're also looking at other ways of better use of water. So the Ngāi Tahu dairy farms are currently better than best practice in terms of dairying. But that's not good enough in the dairying industry. We're at the top of we're actually further ahead in best practice than the current standards, and that's not enough. So we're thinking about regenerative farming. We're also looking at way more efficient and better uses of water on those farms so that we've got quite a few scientific projects going to look at the uses of water under the current system and how we can improve it. And we're working in with Waimakariri Irrigation to do that. So basically, a byproduct of running this claim has actually led us to be far better ourselves and to think more long term about what we're trying to achieve. When you've got one branch of the tribe advocating a change in how we manage fresh water with the other branch of the tribe that's dairy farming, how do you marry the two up and get a far better outcome? So these are all discussions that are ongoing amongst ourselves, but I think that the days of extreme extractive economy are over, and we have to start thinking much more cleverly about how we do things in the South Island, because it is the food basket of the country. And when you look at what's going on around the world and global warming, we can't afford to not have food security in this where we live. So we're thinking about all these issues, and the beauty of the tribe that other people can't do is that we're thinking 50 years and what's going to happen in the world and where is the nature of freshwater going to be. And we've connected in. For the last 15 years, we've been doing an exchange with Stanford University, the Woods Institute, every year. And we send our brightest and best up there and they come down here. And we've been focusing on impacts of global warming, impacts on the environment around fresh water. We made that a real focus of the last decade of our research and development. We also have commissioned a lot of work from people like NIWA and different environmental companies to help us understand our environment from a scientific basis and be able to look at what needs to change across the whole takiwā. And we can pinpoint a river in the takiwā and tell you exactly what's wrong with it, what nitrates, what species are in decline, what's wrong with that whole catchment. So we've developed a huge body of work that is very important to how we look at the future. And we've also teamed up with Wageningen in the Netherlands, because this is all on a much smaller scale. They're the size of Canterbury, but they're a massive dairy producer for Europe, and they actually supply Europe with most of its vegetables through hydroponics and through their different systems of growing food. So we are also teaming up with Wageningen, which is a big university there that specialises in freshwater, to always be ahead of to always understand where the world's going and where some of the top research is around these issues, so that we're bringing in new ideas to how we approach this problem. So I think that's it, yes. So that's it in a nutshell, and I hope it's been informative to you.
Gabriel has said that she's very happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Guy Crozier. I was very interested to hear about the work you're doing in the dairy units, comparing different methods. I think it's a very positive approach, and I'm sure the outcome can only be very positive for everyone and for other farms, dairy farms in the area as well. You surprised me a little bit at the beginning when you talked about how you enjoy going out whitebaiting. The previous speakers here have talked about the species that make up a lot of indigenous species which make up the whitebait, and saying that many of them are facing extinction, partly because of water quality, but also because of whitebaiting. Given the fact that some of these are facing extinction, are you still happy going out whitebaiting?
Yes, I am. And the reason why is this, is my family have been whitebaiting on a particular patch of the Ashley River for the last 7 generations. That's pre-treaty. And we have looked after that river. And when I was a child, when the banded dotterel was nesting, and the banded dotterel nests in the stones, and it's sort of a stupid bird because it makes its nest as a little pile of stones, and it's very easy to just walk on it. And part of our job as children was to put sticks around it so no one went near them and left them free. We know this river. We do not extract for dairying. We do not extract for anything. We keep it clean where we are. And yet, the rest of society thinks it's fine to actually put everything into that river as it goes on its journey to the sea. And you can sit on the banks at night and you can watch it drain out like a bathtub. And only 30% of all resource consents are actually monitored by ECAN. So in our view of the world, somebody is stealing water at night. And you can take out our nets and they are covered in cowpoop. And there was a recent article in the North Canterbury News where some of my relations were complaining about the cowpoop on their nets and on their, I've got photos of it, I should have included it actually in this. We have not destroyed this environment. And then suddenly, the rest of the community gets wind that these species are endangered, and suddenly they're looking at us to stop our practices. So we would put it back to the docs of the world, and actually they have recognised this, that we monitor our take of whitebait. So we've got very strict rules. If my family can't keep our area on the Ashley alive during the season, that's somebody fishing there, taking a particular amount every day, we lose those rights forever. I inherited those rights from my father when he died. My son can't go down to that particular place of the river and whitebait with his mates. I have to be there. He can't go on his own. So we've got a far greater control over how we fish that fishery than anybody would ever imagine. And it's the same with the mutton birding. And repercussions of breaking the rules are swift and forever. And if I was the generation that lost those rights, I would have deep shame that I would never come back from. So we have a far better and more effective way of monitoring our behaviour on those rivers. And if people had listened to us 30 years ago, we would not be in this state. And I won't get hot about it now, but I do get very hot because suddenly everyone else has taken far too much. We only take what we need to feed our families. We don't take more than that. People that sell it are often ostracised in the community, and there is one particular family that does, and they are quite, it's not an easy relationship. So we don't sell stands like over on the West Coast for 100,000, you know. So that's my answer. May not be the one you want to hear, but I'm very hot on it.
All right, any other questions?
Kia ora. Thank you for your very, very interesting talk. But what I'm missing is you can't walk in this water. Your dog would die if it went in it, but you're eating fish and seafood from it. Yeah.
Yes, we are. And I'm always torn. Every year it gets worse. So the last 5 years I've been really worried. We've tried to have them tested to see what is... So what whitebait do is they come up on the tide, and then they go out on the tide. So they don't last long in the water. But if they do stay overnight, for some reason they get caught in some little nook and cranny of the river, their bellies are a different colour, and we don't eat them. Okay.
I'm thinking about the eels and all the other...
Oh, so in my lifetime, we've been told by scientists, we would, in eel season, we dry the eels in the wind and we roll them every day for 7 days and salt them. We've got this practice called pāwhara eels that we've been doing forever, and they're very beautiful. They're really lovely. Even if you don't like eels, you'd like them like this. But what we've been told by scientists is we should only be eating it once every 3 months because of the toxins in the flesh. And what we would do in season, well, we would eat it 3 times a week. So families down in Arowhenua are still eating it 3 times a week in the season. They're saying, I'm not listening to that. I know that the impacts of what our practices will have a bad impact on our health and time. And that's why we're so keen to do this. Yes, you're right. It will have an impact. I'm much more careful about where I eat my whitebait from. I would never eat anything from around Canterbury, and I would never buy, and we've been like this for a few years, any whitebait from a pub. Because you don't know if people have got it out of the Avon, I wouldn't go near it. And I would only, if I didn't get it where I get it, and at the particular time that we get it, and we weed out ones with the dark bellies, I would get it from the West Coast. But you have to look at the nitrates in a lot of those rivers as well now, because it is getting a lot worse.
Gabriel, I've got a question regarding the regenerative farming and the comparison that is taking place up in the Amuri. Are the results of that going to be on a Ngāi Tahu website, or how can we monitor and be sort of...
I think, I can find out actually and come back to you on that, because I think they were monitoring it all the way through for the 8-year period, and then the 8-year period they were going to publish what?
Oh, it's 8 years. I heard you say 2, so I misheard
8 years.
that. 8 years.
I think we're halfway through year 1 now.
Yeah.
To get the full effect of it, but they think that they will know after 2 years just where it's going, you know. And actually it's looking positive now.
Ken Mitchell, a couple of questions. The 3 waters, can you remind us again what the 3 waters are?
It's drinking water, storm water and sewage.
Okay, fine. And the other question is, about 2 or 3 years ago I read in the paper that ECAN was issuing meters to dairy farmers to gauge how much water they are putting on their farm. And a while later they did a survey of the paper and found that not many had been put on. And I just wondered, has there been an update? How's that situation going now?
Not that we know about it, but the issue for ECAN is they're as good as the ratepayer base. You know, so what do they cut and what do they keep? And if in a perfect world we think metering is a good way to measure, you know, what you're using. But it's, you know, and it's the same with the politics. We all vote for the ECAN, what are they? Politicians, local politicians. They're no longer commissioners. And is the rural community going to vote for you if you're strongly supporting metering them and monitoring them? And you know, it's all this jumble of what we are as community, and it doesn't quite work that well.
Jim Hudson, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. Back to Three Waters Board, you've probably been asked this ad nauseum, but we as Pākehā are probably least happy about the representation of Pākehā and Maori on the boards. You with your Maori ancestry, how do you feel about that representation?
So currently the Water Services Entity Board is not Māori or Pākehā, it's just the best board director. So that's the board that runs the kata. They're the ones that make all of the decisions, and they would be expert governance people, whoever they were. They wouldn't be necessarily us, or they wouldn't necessarily be Pākehā. They're the best people for that job. On the regional representative group, which is the body that helps appoint them, there's 6 non-Māori representatives that will probably come from councils, and there's 6 Ngāi Tahu in the Entity D, which is the South Island one. So it's up away from the actual daily administration that the board would do. So we think that's a good way to work it, because we do have interests and we want to make sure that our voice is heard. And we think that actually we represent the whole of the Entity D, because we've got 18 villages around the whole area, the Ngāi Tahu Takiwā. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Oh, there's a lady over here. Yeah.
Oh, Alison Chafee. Just as a matter of interest, will Ngāi Tahu want to create any more dairy farms other than 17?
So this is the,
Is that the cut-off point for Ngā Tahu?
yes. So the hapu that I come from and out at Tuahiwi, we're the marae that has what's called mana whenua over all of Canterbury. We go from the Huranui down to the Ashburton River, that's our territory. And when the dairy farms were first put up in what was the Airwell Forest, we were sold a bit of a pup at the marae. They had to come to us to get permission. And since then, this was 20 years ago maybe, we've started to see, we've educated ourselves and started to see. So we came down very tough on the tribal corporate and said no more. And this is where they got to this point. We're running the statement of claim. We've said no more dairy farms, not in our area, and start doing better what you're currently doing around dairying, and look to get out of dairying. There will be a time where it's stupid to dairy in Canterbury. It's fast coming because of climate change and the nature of the Canterbury climate. Water shouldn't be used to fund dairying.
Ngā Tahu did cut down the Balmoral forest and
Yes,
set up all that land for dairy farms.
yes.
But thank goodness they weren't given a consent. They were stopped.
It's an ongoing fight between the villagers and the corporate. Well, not fight, I should say debate. Yeah, better say. So Balmoral's on the edge of our area. It's Kaikoura district, the Runanga up there.
It's in the Huranui district.
Yes, but where the river cuts it off is,
It's all
mainly.
gobbledygook, really.
Well-
They were given consent to irrigate, but not to dairy farm.
Yes.
But they set them all up for dairy farms.
Yes, they did.
And now that land is, well, I don't know, it's got cattle on it, or
They've got
cows
beef.
on it, but it's not dairy.
Beef and sheep on it, in some of it. And I think some pigs, maybe.
Yes. Well, that's quite interesting.
Okay, Gabriel, thank you very much. And
Okay.
I'll invite Peter Walker. Peter Gordon. Wow, Peter Gordon. Where's Peter? Sorry, I had that wrong.
Kia ora. Kia ora, Gabriel.
Kia ora.
Ka nui ngā mihi miharo ki a koe.
Oh, kia ora.
Ka nui ngā mihi ki tō whānau hoki. Kia kaha ki te mahi.
Thank you.
I just acknowledge Gabriel's wonderful work and her wonderful presentation, and acknowledge her whānau, and also encouraged her to keep up the good work. I think there was a very interesting, and my phone has gone down, of course. I think your visionary explanation of where you're going and where you want to go is very encouraging, because, as you said, there are a lot of very dangerous things around for the health of our community, not just of the local iwi,
Yes.
or the iwi of the whole South Island, or the whole of Te Maui, or New Zealand, in fact. So thank you very much, and this is just a small token of our thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Peter. That's lovely. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. That's okay. Enjoy the rest of your day.